Hello, this is Real World Audio, and this is going to be a very fascinating subject today. It is about purist audio. So, when you look for the shortest possible signal path without any distractions in the components, so just get rid of everything that serves comfort, that serves ease of commercialization for an application, all the fluff that the companies do for marketing, so like a fancy chassis or something like that. It doesn't mean anything really for sound quality, and just keep it as simple as possible, keep it functional, and do try to correct as few things as possible while keeping as many considerations and as many factors optimal as possible. So I'm going to explore in a brief video whether purist audio is a dead end or is it the salvation, because you can read about this online and watch myriads of videos, and half of them will tell you that if you keep the purist approach, it's a dead end, and they have tried it and they failed. And there will be another half of the audiophiles out there who will say it's the only way for salvation, and if you go for a complex system, you are going to fail. So let's explore what's behind these very strong emotions and why people end up choosing that approach, and what happens to people who end up embracing it, and why is the difference. So when you start looking into it, then you will read both of these camps and what they say, and it will be just so confusing. It will lead you nowhere. So let's just cut that part out, and this is where the whole thing boils down to. So when you have a complex audio system, then it is really about processing and control. So in a complex system, you, and not just you, but we are introducing additional parts, additional components into the audio system, because each component will help to achieve the result that we want. So for example, we want to add a preamplifier so that it is a specialized device to adjust the volume and improve the convenience as well, right? And maybe for it to act as a low impedance buffer between the source and the amplifier. Or for example, using DSP to equalize the output of your loudspeaker to match the room, or maybe using DSP to control the crossover of the drivers to optimize it. So these devices, they add an extra layer of complexity, and when you add DSP to EQ your loudspeakers, they are essentially an extra device added to your system, and basically we are increasing the complexity of system to keep things under control. And I would say this is a very valid approach, and everywhere you look you will find this, and yes, it does work. So when you make your system more and more complicated, the more and more control you get over the sound, and the more you can steer it to a specific direction. And this is both the strength and the weakness. And it's a strength because if you want to hear and achieve a certain sound, embracing that approach when you are processing the sound, you are making your system more complicated, then you can achieve what you want with greater certainty. And it's much easier to find advice on it how to do that. And you I would say it is because most of the audio industry is geared to produce components for this type of application. And I put the power lines in the background because this the analogy for processing and control in our stereo is like conducting electricity through our wires. There the electricity is controlled. We have certain voltage and we know the current carrying capacity. It's always the same frequency. Everything is under control. You can depend on it day and night. And by contrast, the purist audio approach is like the lightning bolt. There's absolutely zero control in it. You cannot predict anything. You cannot expect anything. When you turn on your stereo, you never know whether you are going to hear maybe a really crappy AM radio sound, or you are going to hear the most amazing experience you ever had that's related to recorded music. And that's because a purist audio approach is creating the direct line. So as few interferences in the signal path as possible, just the absolute minimum to make things happen. And the result of that will be that your system will be extremely revealing. But you have to remember that what we hear as sound coming from your speakers, it's made up of two ingredients, and those two ingredients is one, your room acoustics, and the second ingredient is your electricity in the wall. And if both of those are exquisite, then the direct line approach will bring you to seventh heaven. However, if they are not perfect, let's say you have a really sucky room acoustics, then you'll never ever make a direct line, a purist approach work well in your room. Or if your power company supplies with a very poor quality line AC, or your neighbors have just too many appliances running all the time, then you will also have problem with the direct line approach. With processing and control, when you have a very complicated system using very sophisticated line filtering, then you can keep a lot of those aspects in control. For example, with DSP, you can force your room acoustics to behave in a way where your room becomes more amenable to creating sound. And that's why in most cases a highly complex system with DSP and everything will work better, because it does not require you to be extremely knowledgeable on every part of your audio chain. It's not a lifelong quest. I would say still it's going to be very hard to put together a very highly optimized, highly controlled system. I'm not saying it's an easy road, but compared to a purist system, it's a walk in the park, truly. And you can put together a very nice controlled system in a year, and it will take you a decade to put together a similar purist system. And the main difference between them will be that when you have a very controlled system, then in most of the time you will hear a more consistent sound quality coming from it, but at a medium level. With a purist system, the sound quality can be garbage, but it can jump up to so high out of the scale that a controlled system will never ever reach to that level. And this is something that is really need to be experienced. And when people first time are subject to this direct line approach, it's always like tears and shock and just like what's going on. It is like a big surprise. And when you are subject to a very controlled system, then you stay in your mind space and you say, oh, we had excellent frequency range, phenomenal resolution, oh man, the 3D imaging, wow. And you get focused on the audio gear. Direct line, it's like, okay, now I understand what Mozart wanted to say with this violin piece. So premises. So when you have a controlled system, the way these systems are built, they are built on the premise that we can control sound. And when there is an error that the equipment makes, we can fix the error. And the more control we apply, the more things we fix, the better the sound will be. Makes sense, right? And the Purist system, the premise for that is the more we interfere with the sound, the more it gets altered. Leave it alone, because any change, when we try to control it, we try to undo our errors, we cannot do it perfectly. By making an error correction, we are introducing an error, because the error correction requires additional components, additional piece of electronics, and introducing those complicated additional electronic circuits will introduce their additional distortion. So basically, when you have an error correcting circuit, then you are first introducing a huge amount of error by that circuit and a huge amount of loss, and then we are trying to make things all right. So that's how it is. And basically, so when we are doing the Purist approach system, then let's just start with the end, room acoustics. I think everyone had some experience with that when you are in a room that has phenomenal room acoustics, even if you set up a modest audio system. I mean, not you, but I don't know if you are an expert in audio or not, but if you have someone who is an expert in audio, and that person sets up a very basic audio system in a room that has fantastic room acoustics, it will sound much better than the most expensive, most refined audio system in a very poor acoustic room. And that's something that every audiophile needs to be aware of, that if you want good sound, you need a good room. And if you don't have a good room, you can throw in millions of dollars on your audio. You are not getting the sound that you want. A much easier fix is to go from the perfect room. And then here we go, because nowadays there's much attention on trying to DSP the room, to correct the room errors. This is not the video where I want to go into details about that, but you cannot correct the room. And basically that's because the room is not one thing, and when you do one correction in the frequency range, it's not going to correct the room, it's going to correct what you hear at a certain listening position. So basically, if you put your head in a vice and then you use DSP, that's the only scenario where room correction works. because the room modes and the room behavior changes depending on where you are standing in the room. So for example, in your sweet spot at that height where your ears sit, there might be, let's say, a plus 10 dB peak at 68 Hertz and a minus 20 dB dip at, let's say, 32 Hertz. But if you move like 2 feet to the left or the right, the ratio might be reversed. And now, if you just DSP your sound to remove, to nullify those peaks at your sitting position, it means that when you go a few feet away, then those differences there will be amplified. And that's what I've experienced with the best DSP I heard, is that when I sit at the perfect sweet spot, then it sounds very controlled and very elegant. But if I just slouch, so I am like 3 inches lower in my couch, then it's not as good anymore. I hear problems. If I move my head 3 inches to the left or right, it starts to fall apart. And if I move over from my couch to the side of the room, then it becomes terrible. And when we switch off the DSP, then off that sweet spot, it's much better without the DSP. You can move around the room, and it's not perfect quote unquote and everywhere, but it's listenable. When we add the room EQing and you EQ it to the T, then you will have a vice position for your head where it sounds good, and the rest of the room is problematic. Now, when you apply the Purist approach, with the Purist approach, basically you move your speakers and you find that spot for the loudspeakers where they work together with the room, and you avoid having these excessive dips and peaks that distract the musical experience. And when you work with the room and you position your loudspeakers, then essentially you do the same thing as DSP does, but without adding a very complicated set of electronics into the system. So basically, you are not going with all those distortions and changes that it would introduce. So basically, the tenet of Purist audio is make things right from scratch, so you do not need band-aids. And basically, following the Purist path is identifying the band-aids and ripping them off and learning what is a band-aid and what is something necessary. And that's what takes very long for everyone to figure out. And let's look at the source side, what it means to be an audio purist or have a very controlled system. If you have a very controlled system, then you need carefully scrubbed recordings to play. And that's why those systems can only play those audiophile recordings. If you put something else there, then it will qualify as junk and you can't even listen to it. It will sound noisy, colored, distorted, and problematic. And when you have a Purist system, you play whatever you want. You can put those recordings that sound like junk in a controlled system, you put it on a Purist system, and you will enjoy it tremendously, and you will be amazed that all those colorations and distortions are not there. And you will be wondering, how come when my system does like 15 or 20 different layers of error correction, and it's supposed to have vanishingly low distortion, yet that same LP or CD sounds so colored, distorted, noisy, and junk, versus that audio system that has zero error correction and it sounds undistorted, clean and natural. So what is going on? And what's going on is that with the Purist systems, you are not losing the signal. So the signal loss is not there, and then you are getting loads of those cues and signals that make sound natural. In a controlled system, it's contributing, I mean, it's controlling a lot of attributes and makes the sound very controlled, but there's so much signal loss that unless your recording was done to record excessive amounts of information and it was just recorded normally, then there, because of the excessive amount of information loss, there won't be enough information for the system to translate it into meaningful music. So basically each component, resistor, capacitor, wire, connector, transistor, tube, or component, bigger component like a cartridge, everything takes away from the information and changes the information that goes through. And when you lose information, you cannot put it back. When you change information, you cannot unchange it. Just think about what all of these things are doing to the sound. Is like breaking an eye. Breaking an egg. So when you break an egg, you cannot put it back together. You can do tricks to, like just pick out the shells and stuff like that. But it will never be an unbroken egg anymore. Whatnot. Gee, we are at 20 minutes already, so I think I'm going to finish now and let's continue from here. Thank you for tuning in. Please share your thoughts and comments. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.